Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this week's Keeping an Eye on the Geopolitical Ball with me, Jamie Shea, Senior Fellow at Friends of Europe. My old boss at NATO, the Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, said about the COVID-19 pandemic that we should not turn a health crisis into a security crisis. By that, of course, he meant the way in which COVID was driving geopolitical competition over medical supplies, over vaccine delivery, over the origins of the COVID virus itself between the West and China. But today, looking at the Russian invasion of Ukraine, he would probably turn the formula around and say that we should not allow a security crisis to develop into a health crisis. Now, much of the debate since Russia's invasion has focused on rising oil and gas prices, inflation in the West on the back of all of that, pressure on living standards and so on. But there is a much bigger catastrophe for the world, unfortunately looming behind those inflationary trends, which is the pressure on food supplies. Last week, the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations, which is based in Rome, issued a warning that in February, food prices reached their highest levels ever. Wheat was up by 50%. Barley up by 31%, rapeseed and sunflower oil up by 60%. 800 million people in the world now suffer from food insecurity. That's about 1/10 of the world's population. And already we've seen some of the consequences in terms of political instability. In Libya, for example, where the bread price has gone up by 40%. There have been large demonstrations in Baghdad, in Iraq, given the rise of 20% in wheat and in sunflower oil. We've also seen 3 consecutive days of protests taking place closer to home in Albania. And in Tuscany and Sardinia, sunflower oil is already being rationed to 2 litres per customer. Okay, not exactly a sign of hardship yet, but no doubt shades of things to come. And so the Russian invasion of Ukraine is now producing an impact on already very tight global food markets. We have to take account of the fact that Russia and Ukraine together supply about 30% of global grain. They provide 52% of global sunflower oil, 14% of wheat, 90% of barley, 14% of corn. And already Ukraine has banned exports of buckwheat, oats, and millet, as well as corn. To ensure adequate supplies at home. Russia, of course, is being denied access to its international markets because of the sanctions, particularly on Russian shipping and shipping insurance, and has been trying to sell most of its wheat to China. Of course, in Ukraine itself, the Black Sea is largely now cut off because of the fighting. Ports like Gdansk and Mariupol can't export Ukrainian grain to customers, for example, in Turkey, in Egypt, in the Middle East and Northern Africa. 50 ships are currently marooned. And of course, the fighting in Ukraine means that this summer's crop will not be planted. As irrigation is disrupted, farms are destroyed, and many Ukrainian farmers take up arms and go and fight against the Russian occupation as well. We also have to bear in mind that Ukraine and Russia supply much of the world's fertilizer. Russia has a near monopoly, for example, in supplies of urea, a vital component of fertilizer, and the Russian ally Belarus supplies much of the potash for fertilizer. Belarus has already experienced sanctions on those exports following the fraudulent elections 2 years ago. So the World Food Programme is now reporting that 31% that we are 31% below the global average, the 5-year average, in terms of world food supplies. We've had some disappointing harvests in the United States, in Canada, in Brazil and Russia, on the back of climate-driven extreme heat, very hot summers, forest fires this year as well. So what can we possibly do about this situation at a time when clearly food is going to occupy a much larger share of our monthly expenditure as we cope to already much higher prices? There is, of course, first and foremost, the danger of food nationalism as countries keep their supplies at home. For example, Egypt announced that it was no longer exporting. Russia has cut off supplies in the past. There could be the kind of panic buying that we saw when it came to vaccines or protective hospital clothing and equipment during the COVID pandemic. Well, there's certainly no quick fix here, but the EU, as it looks at so-called EU strategic autonomy, has to think about what food autonomy means. In the first place, of course, we have to keep the humanitarian channels open, particularly when it comes to dealing with food supplies to Afghanistan, to Ethiopia, to Yemen, and those kind of places. The mobilization that we saw over the last few weeks in support of the Ukrainian refugees is admirable, but we need to remember that Africans and Afghans deserve equal care and attention, and prevent famine in those places. Closer to home, of course, we have to look at better use of foodstuffs, so less grain to feed cattle, which means less meat consumption. We're all going to have to move to a largely vegetarian diet, which may actually be better for our health too in the long run. We're going to have to stop using grain for fuels such as ethanol, which already amount to 148 million tons a year, at a time when we have a 35 million ton shortfall in corn. We're going to have to look at reviving farmland and how the EU Common Agricultural Policy can ensure the EU's food security. We're going to have to make farming a more attractive profession for many. Further afield, we're going to have to see where we can get new supplies. For example, India has a large food stockpile. If it releases 15 million tons onto international markets, it's similar to the way we're looking for other countries to release oil from their stockpiles at the moment to get the petrol pump price down. This would help, although it would still only be 1/3 of what Ukraine and Russia contribute to international markets every year. We're going to have more food education for our citizens so that we use food better and conserve it better. It's ironic that at a time when the world is facing a potential food catastrophe, we still waste 1/3 of all of the food that is produced. We're going to have to look at science and technology for better crops, genetically modified foods, where they, of course, can play a role, better use of irrigation, and all of those kind of things that will help us along our way. It's a great irony that many of the countries in Africa and the Middle East that Putin in recent years has been trying to charm into cooperation with Russia are now in the firing line of the food catastrophe that President Putin, intentionally or unintentionally, is unleashing as a result of his invasion of Ukraine. But this war, unfortunately, is proving not only a tragedy for the Ukrainians, but a potential tragedy for millions of people elsewhere in the world too. Thank you for watching and listening this week. Hopefully see you again next week. Bye for now.